Nothing is in the room. No monster, no ghost, no jump scare waiting at the end of the hallway. Just a hallway. And yet something is wrong. You can feel it right now, looking at these images. Something in your chest tightened. Your brain sent a signal. Not quite fear, not quite nausea, something in between. A quiet alarm that you can't name and can't turn off. I actually have a specific place. It's a parking garage, level 3, the one near my old office. 11 p.m., the kind of silence that has texture. I've avoided that floor for 2 years now, and I still can't fully explain why. But I'll come back to that. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Why are you more afraid of an empty room than a room with a monster in it? Seriously, think about that. Because our whole lives, we've been trained to fear things. The shape under the bed, the figure at the window, the face behind the door. Horror movies handed us something to run from. But these images, there's nothing to run from. And somehow, that's worse. That question is exactly why one photograph broke the internet in 2019. A single, grainy image of a yellow office room, posted anonymously to 4chan. No context, no caption, no monster. Not because of what was in it, because of what wasn't. I'm not going to give you a Wikipedia rundown of every level and entity in Backrooms lore. That content is everywhere, and most of it honestly misses the point. What I am going to do is show you how that yellow room got inside your head, and why the exact same psychological glitch has been haunting people across cultures, across centuries, long before Kane Pixels ever picked up a camera. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. You're already in the Backrooms. You have been for a while. Let me describe the original Backrooms image to you. Not visually, physically. Imagine you're standing in a room. The walls are covered in a mustard yellow wallpaper. The pattern repeats over and over, 1,000 times in every direction. The carpet beneath your feet is a damp industrial gray-green, the kind you know has never been cleaned. Overhead, fluorescent lights are humming, not loud enough to complain about, but loud enough that you'd notice if they suddenly stopped. There are no windows, there are no doors, and the room just continues. Around the corner, down the next hallway, up the stairs, same wallpaper, same carpet, same hum. Now here's what your brain is actually doing in that space. And this part genuinely unsettled me when I first looked into it. The first thing your mind does when you enter any new space is search for visual landmarks. This is hardwired. Your hippocampus, basically your brain's built-in GPS, constantly scans for reference points, a door, a window, a crack in the wall. Anything that lets it build a mental map of where you are and, more importantly, how to leave. The Backrooms gives it nothing. The wallpaper pattern repeats with no variation. It's like walking through a video game level where the textures haven't loaded yet. Your eye tries to find the seam, the edge, the anchor point. There isn't one. The hippocampus starts to panic, and that panic doesn't arrive as a scream. It arrives as one very quiet, very specific feeling. Something is deeply wrong, and I don't know why. That's not metaphor, that's neuroscience. Then there's the sound. That fluorescent hum runs at about 60 cycles per second, the frequency of alternating current in a North American power grid. It is the sound of modern infrastructure. Offices, hospitals, schools, parking garages. You have heard it your entire life. Always in the background, always in places where you had somewhere to be, something to do, but you weren't really there yet. That sound has been conditioning you since childhood. It doesn't say danger, it says you are here and you cannot leave yet. Put those two things together, a room your eyes can't map, a sound that tells your body to wait for permission, and you land in a very specific psychological state. Architects and cognitive scientists have a name for it, a liminal space. Liminal comes from the Latin limen threshold. A liminal space is a transitional space, a place you pass through, not a place you arrive at. An airport terminal at 3 a.m. A school hallway during summer break. a hospital corridor, a stairwell between floors. These spaces were built for transit, not for dwelling. They exist between moments. And when you get stuck in one, when the transit never ends, when the departure gate never opens, when the hallway never reaches the exit, something in you starts to come apart a little. Because you're not supposed to be here. You were never supposed to stay. Okay, different country, different story, same feeling, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit to figure out why. It's 2004, Japan. Someone posts on 2channel, the Japanese equivalent of 4chan at the time. They describe boarding a train late at night on a familiar route. But somewhere along the way, without warning, the train stops at a station they don't recognize. The name on the platform sign reads, Kisaragi Eki. They get off to check. The train leaves. Now they're standing alone on a dark rural platform. No cell signal, no map, no next train scheduled. They keep posting updates in real time as they walk down the tracks, into the dark, looking for literally anything. A road, a building, a single light. The thread ends without resolution. Kisaragi Station became one of Japan's most enduring internet legends. And for a long time, I kept thinking, why? Because on the surface, it has almost nothing in common with the Backrooms. Different culture, different look, different feel. The Backrooms is yellow and synthetic and fluorescent. Kisaragi is rural, dark, and silent. One is an American office fever dream. The other is a Japanese ghost story wrapped in mundane train logistics. And yet read both originals on the same night and you will feel the exact same thing. Here's the structural core they share. A normal person doing a completely normal thing, walking through an office, riding a train home, and then, without warning, slipping out of the map. No supernatural event, no cursed object, no villain, just something quietly, procedurally wrong, like the world forgot to file the right paperwork. You took a step and the floor wasn't where it was supposed to be. You reached your stop and the stop wasn't there. Both stories hit the same nerve. The fear that the system you depend on every single day, the building, the train, the city, could just stop working. Not for everyone, just for you. Specifically, quietly, without explanation. In Western horror, it tends to be about place you fall through the world. You end up trapped somewhere wrong. In Japanese keidan, it's usually directional, you're still moving, but the destination keeps sliding away. One is suffocation, the other is forward motion that leads nowhere. But underneath all of it, the aesthetics, the setting, the language, the fear is identical. You have been pushed out of the ordinary world, and the ordinary world has no procedure for getting you back. That is the oldest fear we have, older than monsters, older than death. The fear of being outside the order of things. The Backrooms fandom, as creative and dedicated as it is, made a mistake. It's a mistake almost every horror IP makes when it gets too popular. They added monsters. They gave the darkness a face. Entities with names. Entities with behaviors. With weaknesses. Level classifications. Survival guides. Organizations operating inside the Backrooms with agendas and hierarchies. A whole ecosystem of threats you could learn, catalog, and eventually defeat. The moment that happened, the Backrooms stopped being horror. It became a survival game. And look, I genuinely respect Kane Pixel's filmmaking. The cinematography is brilliant. As found footage craft, the early shorts are near perfect. But the moment you introduce a creature with a specific visual model your eye can track, with a specific audio cue that signals its approach, that original wordless dread just dissolves. Because now, you have information. And information is the enemy of true dread. The original photograph had zero information. No entity, no taxonomy, no escape route. Just a room that had no reason to exist and no intention of letting you leave. That ambiguity was the horror. It was the whole thing. Here's why. Humans are extraordinarily good at dealing with defined threats. We evolved for it. A predator has a shape, a speed, a direction. We run, hide, fight, survive. Every monster movie follows this pattern. The horror is the chase. The catharsis is the confrontation. Satisfying. Clean. But that's not this. What the original Backrooms tapped into is something your brain has no response for. You cannot fight a hallway. You cannot outrun a room that extends forever. There is nothing to locate, confront, or bargain with. The architecture itself is the malevolence. And that kind of fear, the kind with no object, no face, no opponent, is the kind we are genuinely not built to handle. Which brings me to something I keep returning to. That original Yellow Room photograph wasn't fiction. It was a mirror. We already live in the Backrooms. We just stopped noticing. Think about where you spend most of your waking hours. Office floors with identical cubicles under fluorescent lights that have been running since before you were hired. Shopping mall corridors with the same store layout in every city in the world. Hospital waiting rooms that could be any hospital, any country. Airport terminals at 2 a.m. where all the shops are shut, and the only other humans are also just waiting, faces down, going nowhere for now. These are liminal spaces. We built our entire civilization out of them. The Backrooms hit so hard in 2019 because it arrived at a specific cultural moment. Post-pandemic anxiety, the mass migration to remote work. An entire generation of young adults who had spent years staring at Zoom grid interfaces, uniform Slack channels, corporate template emails. People who had already felt, somewhere in the back of their mind, that the floor wasn't quite solid anymore. People who had felt at some point during a Tuesday afternoon work call that they'd been wandering the same hallway for years and couldn't remember which direction used to lead to the exit. That's why the original image hit so hard. Not because it showed you something alien, because it showed you something you already knew. So here's what I want you to actually take away from this. Liminal space is not a horror genre. It's not a meme. It's not an aesthetic you scroll past on Tumblr. It is a real psychological experience, the disorientation of being caught in a transitional state, in a space built for passing through, with no clear way to reach the other side. The Backrooms, at its most stripped down, was just that feeling made visible. A space that said, you are between things. You are not here, you are not there, and you may never be either. Kisaragi Station said the exact same thing from 10,000 miles away in a different language with a completely different visual grammar, because this fear doesn't belong to any one culture. It belongs to the part of us that built cities and transit systems and office buildings and then slowly realized we'd constructed environments optimized for efficiency and quietly hostile to actually being human inside them. We built a world out of liminal spaces. And then we were surprised when people started feeling trapped. The next time you walk into a parking garage alone at night, that specific quality of silence, your own footsteps, echoing off concrete pillars that extend in every direction. Pay attention to what happens in your chest, that low-grade wrongness. The sense that this space does not care whether you are here or not. That's not paranoia. That's your brain correctly reading the room. It knows you're in between, in a place built for transit, not for staying. And now, you know what to call it. I mentioned a parking garage earlier, level 3, 11 p.m. I've still never figured out what it was about that specific floor. The lights were fine, nothing moved, nothing happened. But something about the way the silence sat there, like the building had been holding its breath long before I walked in. Maybe that's all the Backrooms ever was. A building holding its breath, waiting for someone who would never come to let it out. In your real life, not in a game, not in a movie, is there a place that did that to you? A hallway, a stairwell, a school after hours, a hotel floor at 4 a.m.? Somewhere that felt just slightly off, and you still can't fully explain why? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Because the most unsettling Backrooms entries aren't on any wiki. They're in your memory.